I found the hair on a Tuesday morning 6 days after I moved in. Not one strand, a whole nest of it, coiled in the corner of the bathroom floor like something had shed there. Long, dark, pressed flat against the tile the way hair gets when it's been wet and left to dry in the same spot, over and over, night after night. I stood there in my socks, staring at it for almost a full minute before I told myself it must be mine. That was the first lie I told myself in apartment 4B. There would be many more. My name is Marcus, and I want you to understand something before I go any further. I'm not a person who scares easily. I grew up in a house where the boiler groaned at 2 in the morning and the basement flooded every spring and nothing, not one single thing, ever felt wrong. I don't believe in ghosts. I never have. I'm a 23-year-old accounting student who spent the better part of last summer in a 3-story walk up in Caldwell, Ohio, studying for his CPA exam. That's the kind of person I am. Practical, grounded. The kind of guy who double-checks his math. But I'm telling you right now, from my childhood bedroom where I've been sleeping with the light on for the past 8 weeks, something lives in that building. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it was ever human, but it watched us. It watched us the entire time, and I'm almost certain, that when I left, some part of it decided to follow me home. Let me start from the beginning. I moved to Caldwell because of a program. The accounting firm I was interning with offered a summer intensive, in person only, at their regional office. Caldwell was the closest city. Not a city really, more like a large town with ambitions, the kind of place that has a chain restaurant and a hardware store and a vague smell of industry you can never quite locate. I had 5 weeks to find housing, no car, and a budget that made most of my options a joke. That's how I ended up at the Renner building on Holt Street. The listing online was sparse. Shared housing, furnished rooms, utilities included. The photos showed a clean lobby, a window overlooking the street, a bed with a gray comforter. The price was the real selling point, $340 a month. In a city like Caldwell, that should have been the first red flag. The second red flag was the building itself. 3 floors, restaurant on the ground level, a diner called Patty's that smelled aggressively of bacon grease at all hours of the day. The second floor was the rooming house, a long hallway, 12 doors, 6 on each side. Each room had an attached bathroom, a bed, a small desk. Basic, institutional. The kind of place that makes you feel like you're staying in a hospital that's trying to seem friendly. The third floor was unfinished, a wide open terrace with exposed brick, a few water tanks bolted to the exterior wall, and a single locked room at the far end that no one could tell me anything about. The warden, a heavy-set guy named Ed, who smelled like cigarettes and kept his keys on a retractable belt clip, told me to stay off the third floor as much as possible. Renovations ongoing, he said, and changed the subject. I was assigned to room A1. The air inside smelled like it had been sealed for a while. Not mold exactly, more like stillness, like a jar of old pennies. The bathroom had a Western-style toilet, a detail I noted because every other room I later visited had the same, which struck me as unusual for a building this cheap. On the floor beside the toilet, 3 long dark hairs. I swept them up, thought nothing of it. 2. My roommate arrived 4 days later. His name was Dolan, a second-year law student, tall and reserved with a nervous habit of checking the door lock twice before bed. We got along fine. We mostly existed in parallel, which suited us both. He studied at the library. I studied at my desk. We ate at different times and avoided the kind of intimacy that makes shared housing complicated. The hairs came back on the 3rd night after Dolan arrived. I had cleaned the bathroom the day before, genuinely cleaned it. on my hands and knees with paper towels and a bottle of disinfectant spray I bought from the dollar store on the corner. I scrubbed the grout. I wiped down every surface. When I went to bed that night, the floor was bare. In the morning, there were 9 long black hairs on the tile between the toilet and the wall. I picked one up and held it against the light. It was fine and straight and very long, at least 18 inches. I have short hair. Dolan has short hair. I went to his side of the room and held the hair against his pillow for comparison, measuring with my thumb. Not even close. I woke him up. I shouldn't have. It was barely 6:30, but I needed him to see it. He looked at the hair, looked at me, shrugged. "Old building," he said. "These places retain stuff forever. Hair gets into vents, gets redistributed, means nothing." I wanted to believe him. I tried to believe him. We went down to Patty's for eggs and coffee, and by the time we came back upstairs, I had more or less convinced myself he was right. But the hairs kept coming. Every morning. Not dozens, but always a few, always long, always dark, always in the corner near the toilet or the far edge of the shower mat, in the crevice where the wall met the floor. I started a private inventory. I don't know why. Something about it disturbed me in a way I couldn't articulate, and tracking the details made me feel less helpless. Tuesday, 4 hairs, 2 near toilet, 2 by drain. Wednesday, 7 hairs, 1 on the mat itself, standing upright somehow, which I chose not to examine too closely. Thursday, a cluster of 11, arranged in a loose arc along the baseboard. Arranged. I told myself that was the airflow from the vent. Patterns from airflow. That's a real thing, right? I cleaned the bathroom a second time, more thoroughly than the first, and this time I checked the ceiling vent myself, unscrewed the panel, looked inside with my phone's flashlight. Dust. No hair, empty duct going dark a few inches back. The next morning, 6 hairs, 2 on top of the toilet lid. About a week in, I noticed the guy on the 3rd floor. He lived up there full time, apparently, in the one locked room. I never learned his name. The other residents only ever called him the 3rd floor guy, and Ed the warden deflected every question about him with a kind of tired irritation, like I was asking about a private grievance that had been litigated long ago and settled unfavorably. What I can tell you is what I observed with my own eyes. I went up to the terrace most evenings to call my mom, because the signal was better up there. And every time I went, in the summer heat that pressed down on that rooftop like a physical weight, I would find him sitting on the same upturned plastic crate near the east wall. He was young, maybe my age, maybe a little older, with a thin build and no apparent tan despite sitting in direct sun for what had to be hours every day. He wore hoodies. Long-sleeved, thick, garish hoodies, pastel pinks and bright yellows and coral reds, colors so aggressively soft they looked borrowed. In 90-degree Ohio summer heat, he never seemed to sweat. He never looked up when I arrived. He just sat with his phone in both hands, watching something on the screen, completely motionless. I'm not making a judgment. I want to be clear about that. People contain multitudes. But there's a difference between noticing something unusual and assigning meaning to it. And what I felt looking at him was not judgment. It was the particular unease of something that doesn't fit. A thing just slightly out of register with its surroundings. One evening I came up earlier than usual, and he was there already, his back to me, facing the low concrete wall at the terrace's edge. He was laughing quietly, to himself, a sound so soft I almost missed it. I stood in the stairwell opening for a moment watching. He was watching a cartoon on his phone, a children's show. Bright colors, a cheerful synthetic soundtrack. Laughing at it. I don't know why that image has stayed with me the way it has. A grown man watching a cartoon alone on a rooftop in 100-degree heat, in a pink hoodie, laughing quietly at something no one else could hear. I called my mom from my room that night. The toilet flushed by itself for the first time on a Friday. Dolan and I were in the room. He was at his desk reading a case file. I was on my bed with my laptop open. We heard it simultaneously, a loud, clean flush from behind the closed bathroom door, and we both looked up at the same moment. Dolan frowned, went and opened the door. We stood in the doorway and watched the last of the water settle in the bowl. "Pressure issue," he said. "These old buildings, the water pressure in the pipes goes up and down. Can trigger a siphon effect in the toilet. This is actually plausible. I looked it up afterward. It can happen. But what doesn't happen, what cannot be explained by pressure differentials or siphon effects, or any mechanical phenomenon I've ever read about, is what happened 3 nights later, when I came back from the library at 11:15 to find the bathroom tap running, not dripping, running, a full steady stream of cold water into the drain. I had been gone for 3 hours. Dolan had been with me until 9, when he left for his girlfriend's place across town. No one had been in the room. I stood in the bathroom doorway for a long moment, looking at the running tap. The room felt different, not colder, not warmer, but denser somehow. The air heavier than it should have been. The kind of density you feel in a car when all the windows are closed on a hot day. I reached in and turned the tap off. Then I stood in the main room and listened for a long time. Nothing. Just the ambient sounds of the building, footsteps from the floor above, the muffled sounds of whatever television was running in the room next door, the distant groan of the restaurant's ventilation system 2 floors below. I left the bathroom door open that night. I don't know why. It felt necessary. Toot. In the 3rd week, I moved into room A2. A room opened up. One of the residents had gone back to his family for a personal matter and wouldn't be returning, and the warden offered it to Dolan and me together. A slightly larger space with a window that faced the street instead of the air shaft. We took it gratefully. I was glad to leave A1. I didn't examine why. I just knew that I had stopped looking at the corners of that room, that I had started unconsciously angling myself away from certain parts of it, that I woke up some mornings feeling like I had not slept at all. A2 felt better, lighter, for the first few days. Then I noticed the lock. The door handle had an integrated lock, a knob lock, the cheap kind where you press and turn the interior button to engage. Except this one had clearly been repaired badly at some point, because when you looked at it closely, really looked at it, you could see that the interior mechanism was absent. The lock cylinder, the thing that actually latches into the door frame, it wasn't there. Someone had removed it and put the outer housing back and called it done. Which meant the door didn't lock. Which meant, when I went to bed at night, the only thing keeping my room closed was the inertia of the door against the frame. I mentioned this to Ed. He said he'd look into it. He did not look into it. I mentioned it again. He said the same thing. 3 weeks passed. And then one afternoon, Dolan and I left for lunch, 40 minutes, 2 blocks away, a sandwich place that didn't smell like old grease. And when we came back, the door would not open. I want you to understand what I mean when I say this. The lock was not functional. There was no mechanism inside the handle. There was no deadbolt, no secondary latch, nothing. There was no physical reason that door should have been locked. But it was locked. Solidly, completely, immovably locked. I turned the handle in both directions. I pushed. I pulled. I ran my credit card along the frame where the latch would have been if there were a latch. There was nothing to manipulate, because there was nothing there. Just the door, just the frame, just the absence of any mechanism, and yet the door would not open. We were out there in the hallway for 20 minutes before Dolan went to get Ed, and Ed stood in front of the door with a set of lock picks and a fading professional confidence, and he was unable to open it. He worked the non-existent mechanism for almost half an hour. He called his cousin who does locksmithing as a side business, and the cousin drove over from across town, and spent another 30 minutes on the door. In the end, they had to break the handle off completely and force the frame, which cracked on the bottom side, and the door swung open like nothing had been holding it at all. The room looked normal. Our things were undisturbed. Nothing was missing. Nothing was moved. The cousin looked at the door for a moment, at the broken frame, at the absent mechanism, and he said, quietly, "What the hell was holding this?" It wasn't a question. The water tank was the thing that finally broke me. I need to give you some background first, because this is the part that changes everything from strange experiences in a badly maintained building to something I don't have a proper word for. Some of the residents had been complaining for weeks about the water. Brown water, intermittently. A smell, not sulfur, not rust, something else, something organic and faintly sweet in a way that made your stomach contract. We reported it. Ed called a plumber. The plumber came and went and said the pipes were fine. Maybe slight mineral deposits, common in old buildings. Buy a filter. The filter didn't help. 2 weeks before I left, the issue got bad enough that Ed finally called a second plumber. A different one. A guy from a company in Columbus who came with a camera system and spent an afternoon running it through the building's secondary water line. The tanks were on the roof. 2 large ones, secured and covered, the kind that are sealed with a heavy round lid that takes a specific tool to open, the kind that animals can't get into. When the plumber opened the tanks, he stopped talking for a full 30 seconds. I was on the rooftop when it happened. I'd come up to make a call, and stayed when I heard the sound of something clattering against metal. The plumber had his back to me, and when I walked over to see what was happening, he put his hand out without turning around and said, "You don't need to see this." So I stood where I was and waited, and after a moment he turned and called Ed, and while they were on the phone, he partially lowered the lid on the tank, and in the second before it closed I saw what was in the water. Bones. Small ones. Not a coherent skeleton, nothing suggestive of a complete animal or anything intact. Just fragments. Dozens of them. Pale and smooth and waterlogged, tumbling slightly as the plumber disturbed the surface. Mixed in with what looked like small pieces of gravel, and, glinting in the afternoon light, fragments of broken glass. The tank was sealed. Had been sealed. The lid was intact, undamaged, showing no sign of forced entry. The plumber said it would have taken significant, deliberate effort to get anything inside it. Someone had put those bones in the water. The blockages in the plumbing, the ones affecting only 3 rooms, only A1, A2, and the room on the other side of the hall that had been vacant since I arrived. The blockages weren't mineral buildup. They were fragments. Bone and glass and stone, introduced directly into the water supply at the source, in a tank on a secured roof, behind a lid that required a specific tool to open. When I went downstairs and told Dolan, he sat on the edge of his bed for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "I want to go home." He left the next morning. His cousin picked him up. I watched his car pull away from the window. I should have left then. I didn't leave then. I had 3 more weeks of the program. I had already paid. I told myself the bones were an animal, a nest of some kind, introduced years ago through some gap long since closed. I told myself the locked door was a mechanical fluke. The hairs were from the previous tenants. The automatic flushing was water pressure. The feeling of being watched was the stress of studying for a professional exam in an unfamiliar city. I believed none of this. I know I believed none of it because of what I did in those final 3 weeks. I slept with the desk chair wedged under the door handle. I stopped showering in the room and used the shared bathroom at the end of the hall instead. I kept my window open despite the heat because I needed the sounds of the street, the cars and voices and ambient human life to remain present and audible. I needed to know that the world was still out there, still full of ordinary noise. At night, in the dark, the room felt full. I can't explain this any other way. It felt full. Not haunted in the movie sense, no cold spots, no moving shadows, no sounds that couldn't be rationalized. Just a density, a pressure, like standing in a crowd where you can't see the people, like sitting in a room where 12 people are watching you in complete silence and you cannot turn fast enough to catch any of them. I started timing it. 11:30 p.m. was when it started. I don't know how I knew this. My body knew it. I would be reading or studying, relaxed, normal, and then something would shift and I would look at my phone, and it would be exactly or nearly 11:30, and for the next 2 to 3 hours the room felt occupied. And I want to say watched, but that's not precise enough. Watched implies passive observation. This felt more like assessment, like being evaluated, like being studied. I had not seen the third floor man in almost a week. He had been absent from the rooftop. When I asked Ed about him, offhandedly, as casually as I could, Ed's expression did something complicated, and he said only that the resident was back home for a bit. I asked where home was. Ed said he didn't know. No one in the building had ever spoken to the third floor man. I realized this when I started asking around. Not one resident had ever had a conversation with him. They had all seen him on the roof, in his hoodies, with his cartoons, in the summer heat. Several people mentioned that he never sweated. Several people mentioned that they had, at various points, felt observed from the third floor window, even when the building appeared empty. Several people mentioned that the locked room on the third floor, the one with no visible occupant, the one Ed refused to discuss, had no assigned number, appeared on no building registry, and that the door, when you pressed your ear to it and listened, produced a sound like low, constant, very faint breathing. 2. The night before I left, the ceiling collapsed. Not dramatically, not a catastrophic structural failure, not the whole thing coming down, just a portion. The hallway between the second and third floors had an intermediate landing, a small square of space where the stairs switched direction, and above this landing was an older plaster ceiling. The original construction, not the drop tiles that covered most of the building. Sometime after midnight on my second to last night, I was coming back from the shared bathroom when I heard a sound like paper tearing, very large and very slow, and then a section of that plaster ceiling came down. Not onto me. It fell before I reached the landing, which I can only consider luck, because the mass of it was significant. A full slab 2 feet by 3 feet. And it hit the landing floor and exploded into white dust in chunks and left a ragged black gap in the ceiling above. I stood there in the dust with my toothbrush in my hand, looking up at the gap, and here is the part I have not told anyone. In the gap, in the darkness above the broken ceiling, there was a shape. I know what I saw. I've replayed it many times. It was there for maybe 2 seconds, and the light was bad and the dust was still moving, and I am aware that sleep-deprived eyes will project meaning onto ambiguous shapes. I am aware of all of this. It was the silhouette of a person, crouching, very still, in the gap above the ceiling, in the space between the second and third floor. A space that should not have been large enough for a person to fit in. There was a shape that was the shape of a person, crouching, facing downward, looking directly at the spot where the ceiling had just broken open, looking at the spot where I was about to have been standing. I did not scream. I did not run. I stood completely still, because I had the sudden and absolute certainty that any movement I made was being very carefully tracked, and that the only safe option was to not move. I stood there for what I believe was about 4 seconds. Then the shape was gone. The gap above me was just black space, just the inside of the building's structure, just darkness that could have contained anything. I went back to my room. I sat on my bed with all the lights on until 5 in the morning. Then I packed my bag, left the key on the desk, and left the building without going back to the management to check out, without eating breakfast, without calling anyone to tell them I was leaving. I waited for my bus on Holt Street in the early morning light, and I did not look back at the building. 2. I've been home for 8 weeks. My room here is small and familiar, and the window faces the neighbor's oak tree, and I have spent most of those 8 weeks sitting at my desk with the door closed, working through the study materials for my exam, which I will take in November, which I will pass, because I am a practical and grounded person who double-checks his math. But here is the thing I have to tell you, because I've been trying not to tell you this, and I don't think I can finish without saying it. About 3 weeks after I got home, I started feeling it again. The density, the fullness, that particular quality of being assessed. Not constantly, not every night, but some nights after 11:30, the room changes. The air gets heavier. I sit at my desk and the hair on my forearms stands up slowly, deliberately, like something is running its attention over me, the way you'd run your hand along a surface in the dark, feeling for what's there. And last week I found a hair on my desk, long, dark, absolutely straight, pressed flat against the wood like it had been wet and dried in place. My desk, in my childhood bedroom, in a house 340 miles from Caldwell, Ohio. I picked it up. I held it to the light. I thought about comparing it to my own hair, the way I did that first morning in room A1, the way this whole story started, with me holding a single strand up to examine the length. I thought about doing that, and then I set it down. I didn't want to confirm it. I don't turn my lamp off anymore when I go to sleep. I used to love sleeping in the dark. I was always the kind of person who needed total darkness to sleep properly, who would tape over the little LED indicators on electronics, who would close the blinds fully against the streetlight. I can't do that now. I need to be able to see the room, because the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that won't let me sleep, isn't the bones in the water tank, or the ceiling coming down, or the shape in the gap above the broken plaster, or even the hair on my desk. It's the feeling itself, the specific quality of it. Because I've felt that feeling before, the sensation of being watched from very close by something that isn't visible. I felt it first in room A1 on Holt Street, and the reason I know that something followed me home isn't the hair. It's that the feeling is identical, not similar. Identical. The same weight, the same direction, the same sense of attention trained on me from somewhere just outside my line of sight. Whatever it is, it knows me now. It's been studying me since July. 4 months of observation, learning my patterns, my habits, my sleep schedule, my particular way of sitting at a desk with my head slightly bowed over an open book. And I think I'm almost certain it's not done yet.
Stay